the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
Apartheid is one of the most recent and most sophisticated systems of racial segregation in the world. Beginning relatively recently in 1948 and extending to 1994, this system resulted in the destruction of the rights of non-white people living in South Africa. The South African government's goal was to improve the welfare of the entire nation and to maintain their economic strength, and it did this by instituting numerous laws. The system came to be known as apartheid. In 1652, Jean van Riebeeck, an employee of the Dutch East India Company, arrived in South Africa with the goal of establishing a settlement in between Europe and the Dutch East Indies. As the settlement in Cape Town grew, so did the Dutch's power in South Africa. The black natives initially mounted revolts and attacked the colonists, but they were unsuccessful because of the lack of modern weaponry. Furthermore, the discovery of diamonds and gold in South Africa furthered the interference of colonial powers. The British began colonizing the region, and following this colonization, the British entered two wars with the original Dutch colonists, called the First and Second Boer Wars. These two wars resulted in heavy British casualties, but because of the overwhelming numbers of the British in the Second Boer War, they won. Although Britain won the war, they gave control back to the Dutch. In 1905, a law had already been passed that limited the rights for blacks to vote. And 5 years later, in 1910, the Union of South Africa was officially formed. And in 1913, the Natives Land Act was passed, which restricted the amount of land that blacks could own. In 1948, Daniel Francois Malan was elected Prime Minister of South Africa, and shortly after, the first Grand Apartheid Law was passed. This law was called the Population Registration Act, and required all adults to carry identification cards that noted their racial group. To define people's races, the government separated everyone into four main races: whites, blacks, coloreds, and Indians. Blacks, which held the majority population in the country, received the most restricted rights. For example, in 1949, the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act banned interracial marriages, and in 1950, the Immorality Act made it illegal to have interracial sex. Also in 1950, the second major Grand Apartheid Law, the Group Areas Act, was passed. This law restricted interracial living, and it put blacks into townships, which are governmentally annexed areas. The average house in a township was tiny, had no plumbing, no electricity, and they were commonly made out of sheet metal. In 1953, the Reservation of Separate Amenities Act was passed, which segregated benches, buses, schools, and colleges. Similar to the Civil Rights era in America, whites-only signs and blacks-only signs were common. In 1953, the Bantu Education Act was passed, which officially segregated education. In both an entirely separate system of education for blacks, it was made to teach primarily manual labor skills used in mining. While all these laws were being passed, a resistance was mounting. In 1949, the African National Congress, or the ANC, became predominantly controlled by the Youth League, or the younger sector of the organization. These younger people decided that the only way to stop whites was to hold mass campaigns such as protests, strikes, civil disobedience actions, and boycotts. The goal of these were to be peaceful, but protesters often clashed with the police. Such was the case of the Sharpeville Massacre, which occurred on March 21, 1960, when about 6,000 protesters gathered at the Sharpeville Township Police Station. The protesters were angry about the requirement to carry their racial identification cards, so they were asking to be arrested for not doing so. The protest started off as peaceful, but it quickly intensified. The crowd grew to about 20,000, which was accompanied by 140 police reinforcements. Jets were flown low to try to scatter the crowd, but that only prompted stones to be thrown. Police say that rocks and other debris were thrown at them, which prompted them to open fire on the crowd. Almost 70 people were killed and about 180 were injured. This event sent a domestic and international uproar against the apartheid regime, which prompted many international protesters to join the anti-apartheid movement. One of the most famous members of the ANC was Nelson Mandela. Despite the fact that Mandela eventually turned toward peaceful protests only, his early years of activism were filled with violence. He even advised the group to begin an armed group of members. The ANC allowed Mandela to co-found a militant group called the Mkhonto weSizwe, which translates to Spear of the Nation, and was commonly abbreviated MK. This organization was responsible for bombings of military sites, transport lines, and other important sites of the government. His goal was not to kill anyone, but casualties did occur, which resulted in Mandela being wanted by the government for terrorism. Mandela was then brought to court and sentenced to life in prison.
This man went to jail, a very angry young activist. He came out someone who was magnanimous, someone who had a depth that he would not, I believe, have gained had it not been in this crucible of suffering.
While Mandela was in prison, another man was making his mark on South Africa. This man was named Stephen Biko. Biko started the South African Students Organization, or SASO. Following the creation of the SASO, Biko was banned from giving speeches and writing publicly. Despite the restrictions, Biko was able to help organize the Soweto Uprising, which is a group of protests held by high school students. During the protest, a line of police blocked the protesters' route, and according to an account of one of the policemen, some protesters began to throw rocks. The police then opened fire on the protesters, killing hundreds of children. Following this event, the United Nations, the United States, and many other countries formally condemned South Africa. Also, Stephen Biko was arrested, he was tortured, and eventually killed. In conjunction with many other events, the international community and even the South African government began to end apartheid.
Soon after I entered politics, and in my years as a backbencher already, I came to the realization it's not working. And especially since the early 80s, I became convinced that where we stand is morally indefensible, and that apartheid was wrong, and that it couldn't be improved, it had to be abolished. And I played a leading role in abolishing it. With the benefit of history, I made a profound apology in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, apologizing for the pain and the indignity that apartheid has inflicted on all people of color in South Africa, saying it was wrong. So, with the advantage of hindsight, apartheid should not have existed.
In 1990, after Nelson Mandela was freed from jail at Robben Island, he began negotiating with the government to end apartheid.
It was actually an extraordinary thing. You had to be pinching yourself to say, this is happening. I mean, here are these terrorists meeting with those who just a few weeks previously were hunting them down, had arrested many of them, and others were in exile.
Mandela primarily negotiated with the current South African president at the time, Frederick William de Klerk, between 1990 and 1994. At this point, the government was less reluctant to end apartheid because of the international outcry against the moral indefensibility of the concept and the numerous massacres that came with it. In 1991, the Convention for Democratic South Africa began in the Johannesburg World Trade Center, which fought to give all South Africans control over their nation. In 1992 and 1993, the negotiations continued that slowly brought down the old system of government in South Africa. Finally, in 1994, Mandela was elected as the first president of South Africa, and in 1996, almost all apartheid laws were removed.
This problem of racial discrimination is and was a worldwide problem. And therefore, it's not only in South Africa that self-examination and self-analysis must be done about what was wrong in the past. All the developed and former colonial powers should do the same inner searches of themselves.